Hey guys, what's up? In today's video, I'm going to be sharing a basic overview of the composting process, how you go about doing it, and ways that we use our compost here in our gardens. So, if you're new to composting or you just like to talk about some dirt, stick around as we explore composting. Now let's get growing. Let's get started with a very brief explanation of what composting is. I like to define it simply as the epic process that turns organic matter into an amazing resource that feeds the life in healthy garden soil. You can find lots of resources about the specifics of the ratios of greens to browns or nitrogens to carbon ratios. I'll post some links down below in the description and add any links that are shared in the comments as well. Understanding the carbon to nitrogen ratio is important to understand. Very basically, you need more carbon than nitrogen, but the details of that are a topic for another time. Basically, it all really boils down to what I have said. We're turning organic waste into compost, and there are multiple variations on this seemingly simple concept. Hi, my name is Zach, and I want to welcome you to KT Outdoors, where we share content that helps you build local, healthy food resources by feeding the soil that feeds your body and soul, all while saving you and your family money while increasing your food security. When talking about compost, the key thing to realize when you begin a pile is that size matters. Yeah, I'm just going to leave that one alone. But it does matter because both the size of your pile and the size of the ingredients you're putting into it can have an impact on your success. Whenever possible, I like to build piles that are 3 cubic feet or more. If you build your compost processing area with waste pallets, you have a built-in size gauge of sorts. The key thing to understand is that if your pile isn't big enough, it will be difficult for the composting process to really get cooking. I personally believe that this is the reason for some of my past failures with compost tumbling systems. They're just not big enough to generate that nice large volume of size that gets the heat really going. The center of the pile, at least the big ones that we're talking about, is generally where the action happens. And the bigger that center is, the more stuff is getting processed. So shoot for that 3 cubic feet at a minimum, and you should have some success. The second thing to consider is the size of the material you're putting into your pile. No, I don't always break things down like I know that I should, but it really helps if you do. For this, we employ a range of methods. We have a leaf shredder and both an electric and gas-powered tripper shredder that we often use to break material down before adding it to the piles. I also use a paper shredder often for shredding both junk mail, waste paper, and old newspapers before adding to the piles. My favorite method for breaking down material, however, is chickens. We load their roosting areas with hay, straw, fall leaves, sawdust, shredded paper, and anything else we want to compost. But we also want broken down into smaller pieces to help that composting process. It's amazing how much a flock of chickens can break down a pile of leaves and other garden waste when sufficiently motivated to do so. Okay, like it was just completely full of leaves. And you can see now, based on the action of the chickens, that this material has been broken down into a rather fine, clumpy mess. It is full of chicken droppings, just all sorts of, look, here's, I kind of dug down a little bit. I don't know how focused that is. Like, this is already starting to become compost. And all that we had to do to get them to turn leaves into this was put them in here to live and allow them a reason to scratch through all of this. And that reason, quite simply, is scratch grains. Okay, like I just throw scratch grains in here for them all of the time, which causes them to scratch through all of this material. Now, I was able to dig down, right here, you can see, and scoop up this level of material. That's pretty phenomenally broken down stuff. You can see, there's the motivation for it all right there. A little piece of corn. And that stuff's littered all through here. And so what happens is throughout the day, when they're eating, they scratch through all of this and turn it into this really fine shred, inoculated with tons of chicken poop because they roost right up there. There's a chicken. They roost right up there above us. They poop down here all night long. And then the following morning, they start scratching through it. And they turn it all into what I just showed you right there. So, embrace the chickenness of the chicken and allow them to help you create epic compost. Now, once it's time to create and manage your piles, you want a few basic tools. Pitchforks and manure forks work really well with the collecting and turning of material once we really get to processing the piles. You're going to be turning them now and then to add oxygen into the piles and to keep the microbes growing. I also find it's really useful to have a compost thermometer handy so I can keep track of how the pile is processing. If the heat drops off, then I know the pile needs to be turned, and that usually will get things cooking again. Speaking of cooking, I've got a lot of great content planned this year, so why don't you consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and maybe give this video a thumbs up because that will help other people who might be interested in this similar content find this video. Once you're happy with the level of breakdown in your piles, it will be time to process them into usable compost. For me, a compost sifter is an invaluable tool. I have processed many piles over the years simply using an old milk crate with some hardware cloth wired to the bottom to decrease the size of material that can get through. It's not the easiest way, and I have plans to build something better perhaps this year, but it is effective at removing the larger pieces from the pile, so I am left with a nice, fine compost. The smaller the hardware cloth openings, the finer the material that will be allowed to pass through, so this process is very refinable, especially for a small-scale home gardener. I really like fine compost for my seed starting setups, but am okay with a rougher grade of compost for my garden beds and raised beds. Furthermore, I have used unsifted compost in the lower levels of my raised beds with great success, but we'll talk more about that in a later video. My point here is the sifting process is directly dependent on how you intend to use the finished product. You may or may not need to sift it. Just depends on what you're trying to do with it. Which brings us to the final stage in our composting journey, and that is this amazing product that we have created. Like, what are you going to do with it now? You may be thinking, well, it's not too hard, Zach. Don't I just, put it on the ground where I want to grow stuff? I just add it to my beds? Well, yeah, that's what you do. But if that's all that you do, then you're leaving a lot of potential on the table. Okay? Because here's the deal. This is an amazing product that we just created. I use my compost on all my beds, but I also use it as a key element in the mixture that I use to top dress my raised beds. For this, it gets mixed with peat or coco coir, vermiculite, and a few other organic ingredients, which again, we'll talk about in a later video. Another thing that we like to do with our finished compost is use it as one of the main ingredients in our worm garden beds. So we maintain a worm garden for processing various vegetable and fruit scraps over the years, and mostly I just like to have the worm juice and the worm castings that they create in the process. We'll mix the compost with some shredded paper, some shredded newspaper. We'll add in some coffee grounds, a little bit of sand so they have some grit, and that creates the base bedding. Also put in a little bit of corn masa flour if I can get it, or remember to get it, more than likely. But we mix all of that in with together to make the bedding for the worm bins, and then that's what we bury the food scraps and stuff in. And the worms absolutely love it. I think that using the finished compost is a key part of that success, because there's just lots of great things in there for them to thrive on while they're growing. So we definitely use finished compost for that. It also gets mixed in with potting mixes before adding it to the various pots that we keep throughout the garden. And I sift it into its finest form through the smallest hardware cloth that I can find to use in our seed starting mixes. I think that compost in your seed starting mixes adds some fertility that is generally not present in seed starting mixes. But we'll talk more about the seed starting thing in another video. Can you tell I got a lot of videos planned? Because, yeah, I do. Anyway, and then last year, one of my new favorite things to do with finished compost, last year I started experimenting with compost tea. Compost tea is an amazing fertilized boost for your garden throughout the summer growing season, and I probably brewed up, I don't know, 7 or 8 batches throughout July and the first part of August, just to keep things going, and I was really, really pleased with the results. So using your finished compost to make compost tea is another wonderful option. Yeah, so are you planning on composting this year? Comment down below if you have any tips or tricks for new composters, I should say. Share links to other great resources on this topic, and if you're new to composting, feel free to post your questions. We'd be happy to allow our experience to help you if it can. I hope this video gets you inspired to start composting if you haven't already. I think composting is the number one thing that any new gardener should start. It helps you deal with the waste stream that will be generated by your gardening efforts, as well as the waste stream from animals you may have included in your homesteading plans. Once we started composting, I drastically reduced the amount of organic material from our property that was being sent to the landfill. I can say for certain that every leaf that fell from our trees and every blade of grass that has been cut is still here in some form or another, helping feed the soil and microbes that are providing our family with healthy food each and every year. Every pile that I have built has taught me something more about the process and what works here in my location. So my number one piece of advice is to just start doing it. Build a compost pile. If my experience is any indication, you won't be sorry with the results. Okay guys, that's all for this one. Thank you for watching, and remember to get outside and get growing, because life's better when it's lived outdoors.